the thing that I think is the most important understudied topic in my field is recovery from failure. Almost inevitably we fail when we're trying to achieve anything ambitious.
I think you gotta have a dream.
The School of Greatness.
Really? Yeah.
Please welcome Lewis House.
There's a stat that I saw, a recent survey by one poll that said 80% of people feel stuck in their lives. I'm curious, why do you think it's so hard for people to want to change and create the life that they truly want, the desires they have, the dreams? Why is it so hard when there's that many people feel stuck to actually make those changes?
It's a great question, and I think there's sort of two categories of barriers that are important. One of them is structural and social and sort of outside of your own control.
Okay.
Right? We've got inequality, we have, just the world is tough and it throws a lot at us. There's not as much we can do about that in this conversation. So I want to focus on the second category because that's what I study, and that's the internal barriers that can prevent us from reaching our goals and that can make us feel stuck. And internal barriers, one of the biggest actually is status quo bias. This is something that behavioral scientists have been studying for many decades. It's a tendency to want to stick to whatever path you're on, to feel like any deviation from it will be a loss. It's frightening, it's overwhelming, and so it leads a lot of us to keep doing things that aren't productive, to stay in ruts. And the book I wrote and the science I do is really focused on, okay, say you want to change, and status quo bias is working against you. What are the tools and techniques that you can then use to figure out how do you get like escape velocity from that status quo bias?
So give me an example of, I'll give you an example of, there seems to be like a lot of people who are in relationships that aren't fulfilling them. Or maybe they talk about their partner or their spouse to their friends and family often about what's not working and what they don't like about this person, or them thinking about getting out of it, and they're doing this for months or years. But maybe they're so used to the pain or they're just comfortable with the frustrations that they stay in it because it's less painful than the unknown of something else or being alone, or what? Would that fit into the status quo bias?
Yeah, no, it absolutely would. And it would also fit into escalation of commitment, which is another bias that has been extensively documented, the tendency we have when we're on a path to stick to it, in part because we tend not to ignore sunk costs. So a sunk cost is like something that you can't recover.
It's like 3 years of my life with this person, all this time invested, I can't get that back.
That's right. You can't get it back. All the birthday presents that you purchased and obsessed over.
The house we bought together, the trips we've taken on, the family integrations.
All of those things that they're irrecoverable, they're historical, they're behind you. You can't get them back. So maybe the house you bought actually is recoverable. They're not call that a sunk cost.
The time.
But yeah, the time. We tend to weight that, and we shouldn't. What you need to do is think about, what are my options going forward? What are the costs and benefits of either path? Staying with this person, or moving on. What are those cost benefit paths? But we focus on these sunk costs and think, oh, I can't give that up. But you're not going to get it back no matter what, whether you stay in it or not.
It's in the past.
It's in the past. And so this is a really pernicious bias, and I think it's part of the reason that we would stay in a relationship or in a job that isn't working out.
Right.
Escalation of commitment is really common, and the sunk cost bias is a big part of that.
Escalation of commitment, status quo bias. So what's the biggest internal barrier that holds us back, would you say?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, this is the barrier in the sense to deciding you want to change, right? So right now we're sort of like, before I even write my book, which is about how to change once you've decided to, there's a lot of people who haven't decided they want to change. So I would say status quo bias and escalation commitment are like sister brother biases.
Gotcha.
They're really closely related. They're both keeping us stuck in the mud. And then where most of my research comes in is, okay, you actually have already raised your hand and said, like, I know I need to change. It's time. How do I do it? And so that's a whole different set of barriers, actually, that become challenges, because even once we decide we want to change, even once we've ignored the sunk costs and gotten over the status quo bias, now we have a whole bunch of things holding us back from actually getting to where we want to be. And
what are those things?
Yeah, okay.
What are those things?
Let's go.
Yes.
Let's do it. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of them. The first one is actually literally the getting started problem.
Yes.
Right? So you want to change, but like, when are you really going to do it? When are you going to jump into the deep end? So that's a first barrier.
Okay.
And I open the book with that because obviously, where are you going to open a book about change? It's with getting started. Then I go to probably the next most important, and that is impulsivity. The
Okay.
fact that we tend to overweight the instant gratification we'll get from our decisions, like it's going to taste so good to eat this, or it's going to feel so great to scream at this person, or it's going to be really exciting to buy this instead of setting aside money for a retirement. All of those kinds of, we focus on the present at the expense of our long-term benefits. That's another major barrier, figuring out how do you get through that hump.
Gotcha.
Procrastination is related to impulsivity. We put things off because they don't feel great in the moment. So I think of that, it's a closely related, but it's another barrier. Then we've got forgetting, which I actually think most people underestimate the importance of. But we forget a lot of important things, and we don't get to things because it's just not at the top of the priority list, and we don't put it there, and we mean to put it there, and we don't. So forgetting, I think,
What do you mean by forgetting? What's an example of that?
So another way it's often talked about is like flake out. Like, I'm gonna start focusing on retirement savings. I'm gonna set up the auto deduction eventually. I'm gonna get a colonoscopy. I know I need to get one of those, but I haven't gotten to it, and I just keep flaking out on it. It doesn't come to top of mind when I could do something about it. We put it off, and suddenly we're at retirement without accumulating any savings. And suddenly, we're having an exam, and we find out if only we had early detection, we would have had a better outcome, right? So that's what I mean when I say sort of forgetting or flake out. So that's another category of barrier that can forget change. It's like sort of on the priority list, not high enough that you ever make it at the top, and you keep putting off and forgetting. So that's another.
Why is it so hard for us to get started once we know, okay, now it's time to make the change, but it's still hard to actually get started in doing that? What holds us back from that starting step?
Yeah, well, our motivation to make change is actually, just like our motivation to do anything, by the way, tends to be sort of, it ebbs and flows. Mm-hmm. There are times when we are in a more reflective, action-oriented, change-oriented mode, and times when we're more pessimistic or just sort of going with the flow because we're, in the middle of things. And so actually, I've done some research on something I call the fresh start effect. This is with Heng-Chen Dai, who's down the street at UCLA, my former student, and Jason Reese, senior fellow at Wharton. And what we have shown in our work is that there are certain moments that feel like a new beginning in life.
Like when?
So one that you know about already.
New Year's or?
Yes, exactly, right. Like you didn't need me to come here and tell you about any fancy science. You're like, yeah, I know about New Year's.
Birthday, New Year's,
Yeah, there are moments that feel like, okay, I'm turning a page.
An anniversary, a graduation.
Move to a new community,
a
right?
new job, a new city,
You got it. Those are all fresh start moments. Actually, there's trivial ones too, but they can matter. Like the start of a new week can feel like a fresh start.
That's true.
You sort of sit down, you go into work maybe for the first time in a couple days, you feel fresh at your desk, ready to sit and think about what are my priorities in a way that you wouldn't in the middle of a week. Start of a new month, following celebration of certain holidays, particularly the kind that we associate with fresh starts. So those are all moments when we feel like we've opened a new chapter. And we have a couple things that go on at those moments. One is that we feel like, okay, this is a moment when I want to step back and think big picture about things, because you recognize that there's that break point. You think actually about your life like you're a character in a book, that the way we organize our memories and structure them, it's not linear completely. Instead, it's like, the college years, the years playing sports, the years living in Boston, whatever they are, that's how you structure your memories. And that means there's actually implications for the way you live your life. Because when you get to one of those chapter breaks, that's when you do this big picture thinking.
Interesting.
And you also tend to feel like your identity is shifting, right? So you step into a new role as I'm turning 40 in the year ahead, and that feels like a big break to me. Like I will be in a different age category. When I became a professor, I vividly remember, like that was a huge shift in my identity. I felt like I have a different set of expectations and roles and ways I should sort of dress and talk. And that identity shift that can come, even if it's something as small as, you're stepping into a new year and you feel like the new year, new you can look back and say, well, last year, my old job when I was a graduate student, I didn't manage to eat right. But that was the old me, and this is the new me. And so you feel this sense of optimism and disconnect from those past failures.
Right. I've had this belief, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you have some science that could back this or dismantle this. I had a belief that living a good life is not enough for you to want to change. There's got to be some type, like if you're 80% of my life is good, like I've got a good relationship, I've got a good job, things are 80% there. It's like, I feel like there needs to be some type of breakdown, massive breakdown for us to realize, okay, there's a near-death experience that I had, a near-death or a death in the family or a friend, there's a loss of a relationship, there's a loss of a job, there's a loss of an expectation that you really had a dream for. These kind of bigger breakdowns, I feel like make us reflect stronger towards wanting to make a change.
I totally agree. So first of all, I will say I do not personally have fantastic data on this,
Sure.
but there are survey studies suggesting that those kinds of experiences lead to identity shifts,
Really?
which can lead, of course, as I've described in this other line of work, to the sense of a fresh start and the
Yes.
belief that you want to turn the page. So it's the same principle at play, absolutely. And I think the mechanism, to use like a nerd term, is really
Yes.
the same, right? So it's that something shocking happens, it's sort of a wake-up call, it leads you to step back and do that big picture thinking, and it creates this disruption in your narrative.
Because I feel like it's easy to procrastinate or kind of feel lazy, which is part of your process as well. It's easy to feel that when things are okay, or when things are like good, but they're not like, it's not a big enough pain for you to be like, I need now I have motivation to make a change.
Yeah, no, I agree
Do we
with that.
need a bigger pain, or is it possible to create exponential change or transformation when things are okay or really good, in your thought?
It's so interesting. You know, I do think that even when things are good, we can have these kinds of fresh start experiences that shape us in positive ways. I'll give you an example. I had a phone call. I was driving here from Santa Barbara this morning. I had a phone call with a friend who just got tenure. And he is thinking big. His life is great.
For those
Tenure's
that don't
a
know,
great
what does that
event.
mean for those who
Oh yeah,
don't?
fair enough. Not everyone is part of my weird world.
Academic world, yes.
Okay, so in academia, if you're a professor, this is like the be all and end all of your career. You're working really hard. You get your PhD, you get your assistant professor job. You work really hard. You write a bunch of papers. You teach a bunch of classes. And if your university says, you know, you're doing great, if you're good enough, they bestow upon you tenure, which means permanent job. Job security, basically can't be fired unless you do something illegal. And they're saying, like, you have now total academic freedom. We're no longer going to be evaluating you.
We trust you.
We trust you. And it's like this bizarre institution. It's created to help people take risks. But it is a big moment in the life of an academic when they get to that milestone. It's like, there's nowhere else to go. You've climbed to the top of the mountain. And so it's really exciting. It often happens to people around their 40s, sort of like midlife, when you might already be having some introspection going on about, like, why am I here? What's my purpose? So a lot of academics step back at that moment and think, what do I want to do now? What do I want to do next? I've been climbing and climbing to this point. And I was having this conversation with a friend on the drive here who had reached that point and was having that exact, okay, what's next? And wanted to talk about writing a book since I'd written a book. And like, what is that? Like, he thinks that might be the next big adventure for him. But nothing is wrong. Everything is right. It's just that he reached a moment, he reached an achievement, he got to the top of a mountain and looked around and realized, okay, I've climbed to my goal and it's time to figure out what the next one is. And I think that can be a fresh start too, even though it's positive.
Identity is something that is interesting to me. How important is the way we shape our own identity or view our identity in terms of where we are to where we will be? Like, if we stay stuck in old identities, how do we shed identities? You know, how do we create a new identity even though we've never actually lived it? Will that help us get there? Can you share more just about identity in general on how it hurts us or helps us?
It's a fantastic question, and I'm going to give you a somewhat frustrating answer. It frustrates me. I don't feel like academic research has wrapped its arms around identity the way I would like it to, because I think it is unquestionably so important, right? The labels we put on ourselves obviously matter, but I feel like we don't know nearly as much as we should. It's one of the things I'm most interested to study.
It's your next book.
Maybe. We know a little. One of the things I think is most relevant to the way I think about identity is mindset, which is, it's different than identity, but a mindset can come with, or can be triggered by an identity. And one of the barriers we haven't talked about yet to change that I think is really important is whether you believe you can change. And identity and mindset are a big part of that. So we know a lot about mindset from work, for instance, by Carol Dweck at Stanford, who's done this incredible...
Growth mindset versus fixed mindset.
Exactly.
Powerful.
And that's sort of an identity, right? You identify with being someone who can grow, or you identify as someone who is X, right? Like, I'm only this smart. I'm only this capable. So in a sense, there's an identity that comes with believing you can grow, or an identity that comes with believing you can't. There's also wonderful research on the placebo effect.
Yes.
And how that extends beyond just medicine, right? We know about it in medicine that, like, if you believe a sugar pill is going to make you healthier, you actually experience physiological benefits. But there's some really interesting research showing it's beyond, we think of it in this medical context, and that's where it was first studied. Actually, I learned from a children's book, like Ben Franklin studied this, and I don't know if you know mesmerizing.
Interesting.
That term comes from Dr. Mesmer, who was the original sort of charlatan in France who was giving people fake medicine and making cure. Anyway, and Ben Franklin figured it all out.
Sounds like a Freakonomics show.
It does. It was like, and it's also a wonderful children's book. I wish I'd known that before I wrote my book. It would have been in there. Anyway, there's a lot more though than just the medical component to placebo effects, right? When we believe that we will achieve something that also can improve our achievement, right? When we believe we're going to get an outcome. One of my favorite studies that I describe in the book that I think is sort of related to mindset and identity is work by Ali Crum, who's a psychologist at Stanford. She did this really interesting work with Ellen Langer of Harvard, where they randomly assigned housekeepers to one of two groups. And those housekeepers were either told every day when you go and do your job in a hotel, you are getting exercise at the level that's recommended by the CDC. So you're getting a great workout when you do your job.
You're burning 1,000 calories, or you're getting whatever, like you're...
Right. I don't know if 1,000 calories is the definition.
You're getting a great workout.
Oh, good workout. Yeah, maybe it's more like 300.
Okay.
Just not to get too overboard. And then another group just wasn't told that information. And the question actually was, are there differences in the outcomes those two groups experience a month later in terms of health? So does a group that believes they're doing a job that comes with health benefits actually end up losing more weight, having more controlled blood pressure? And the answer was yes.
Really?
Which is on the one hand, you're like, is that magic? Like, what's going on? On the other hand, you can start to see how it actually would play out and how this would be applicable in other settings. So they believed their job could give them a workout. And all of a sudden, maybe they're choosing to take the stairs from floor to floor to get those extra calories, or like leaning a little bit more when they're, using the vacuum.
Right.
I live in a townhouse in Philadelphia, and someone pointed out to me, like, it's so great that you live in a townhouse, all that passive exercise when you run up and down the stairs. And now I am the one volunteering to, go grab the ketchup that we forgot if we're going to have dinner on a roof deck. That's exciting. I can get extra exercise. So there's different choices that you make once you start to have a different set of beliefs about your, what you're achieving. So anyway, I think of this as related to identity, because if you're starting to have the identity as, I am someone doing a career that's physically active, and now you lean into that and then you experience the benefits. So I think the work on mindset is the best work I have seen that's really rigorous and that relates to identity.
So if belief supports you getting those results you want, or making the transformation or the change you want, how would you suggest that we learn to believe in ourselves more from a scientific point of view? Like, what's the data suggest on, okay, if you say these affirmations, if you look in the mirror and do this exercise, if you just smile at people and you create more reflection of joy, like, what is the thing that you've seen in data that helps increase belief in oneself?
Yeah, I think the most powerful thing is who you surround yourself with.
Really?
So I think the social context you create, the people around you, have so much to do with whether or not you believe in yourself. And by the way, I also want to add a really quick footnote, because the academic in me can't stand not to, which is to say you can have excessive confidence, and that can be harmful. So this is a little bit of a dangerous seesaw we're on here, right? You want to be confident enough and believe in yourself enough that you're going to lean into the opportunities and work towards the goals because you believe you could achieve them. But if you're like, I've got this, I'm perfect, you're not going to practice, you're not going to work hard. So there is, anyway, it's a little bit of a delicate balance. But back to how do you get to that right level of belief? Everything I know from research points to the structure of, the people you surround yourselves with, whether it's the people you work with, the people you train with, if you're an athlete, the people you socialize with, they give you a lot of those beliefs in yourself.
Really?
And you can choose them, but they will, with the messages they send you about what's acceptable behavior, what's normal, what they're achieving, and how you measure up, it shapes so much about our confidence.
Really? There seems to be, I think this is true, and I also love the examples of some of the great athletes who've accomplished so much that were doubted over and over growing up and kind of have this chip on their shoulder, like no one believed in them and they said, I'm gonna go prove them wrong type of mentality, which I think can get you extremely far in terms of success and results, but never feeling this fulfillment inside.
You'd never,
you never
choose
that. No.
Right? So I think what you're pointing to is like, it's not a necessary condition.
Right. And it's not the best environment.
It's not the only, yeah. There are people who can thrive without it, but if you get to choose, and if you want to create an environment where you're going to believe in yourself.
So you think surrounding yourself with the right people, the right environment of people, the right community, what should those people be like? What should their attitude, their energy, their communication style be like with you? If people were reflecting on their 5 to 10 people in their inner circle, what should they reflect on? They should have these qualities, they should say these things, or here's some red flags. If your best friend tells you shouldn't do this, or your best friend says, I don't think you look good doing it, whatever it is, what are those flags and what are those, I guess, positive signs?
Yeah. Well, okay, here let me pivot a little bit to another, we're doing a lot of academic stuff, but obviously I'm an academic. I'm actually going to tell you a story about a person in academia who is the most important person in my career, and that's my dissertation advisor, who, his name's Max Bazerman. He's a Harvard Business School professor, great human being, and a great academic. What he's truly exceptional at is mentoring. His PhD students have gone on to be tenured professors. Now everyone knows what tenure is at every elite institution in the world.
So he's good at instilling belief in other people.
Unbelievably
confidence,
good.
belief.
Unbelievably good. And he does all the other things that you need to do to help someone succeed, right? Like you know good coaches.
Of course.
Right? The training, like the actual teaching of skills, all those things are part of it. But I think he creates an environment for people to thrive. And it actually took me a while after I had graduated as one of his advisees, and I was trying to advise my own students and figure out what was the secret sauce that made him so wildly more successful as a coach and mentor than anyone else in our field had really, stratospherically more successful. And what I realized is he had all the obvious stuff, all those obvious ingredients like, responsive and new his stuff and gives you feedback. But there was an unshaking belief, like he treated you like family. He was there for you. Mm-hmm. He believed that you could do it. He always was giving that positive reinforcement. Another thing that he did that I think is so interesting and related to research is he sort of created, I'll call it like mentoring circles within the students he was coaching, so that we were not always just being coached or mentored and advised by him, right? But he would put us in the position to advise more junior students.
Smart.
So there's this wonderful research that I write about in the book by Lauren Eskris Winkler, who's a professor at the Kellogg School at Northwestern. And she had this amazing insight when she was doing research for her dissertation. She noticed that she was interviewing all these people who were struggling to achieve their goals. And as she asked them what they thought might help them achieve more, because that's what she was interested in, how do we increase achievement, they all had these really deep insights. Struggling salespeople and C students, when she got them to introspect, they actually knew a lot. They maybe just hadn't gotten there and no one had asked them. They also really liked being asked, like, what's your advice? How would you coach someone who was in your shoes? And she realized most of the time when someone is struggling or when we're coaching someone, our instinct, even if it's unsolicited, is to just whip out some advice. Like, here are the 7 things that I think will help you get further. And it can be really demotivating because it conveys, like, I think you're kind of, you haven't gotten your stuff together.
You don't have the answers.
Yeah,
I have the answers.
I'm going to give you the answers. And that's our instinct. And she thought, what if we flip the script? Mm-hmm. What if instead of putting our arm around someone and giving them advice, we said,
what would you do?
What would you do? And actually
Would you
literally,
coach someone? How would you coach someone else?
And not even just how would you actually have them coach someone else.
Yes.
Like put you in the role of a mentor and coach to someone else who has similar goals so that you feel like you're on a pedestal. Wow, someone trusts me to give this kind of advice. I must, be kind of cut out for this. Maybe I'm better at this than I thought. And then you're going to start introspecting in a way you might not if it was just your problem, because you got to help someone else, and you don't want to let them down. And then when you do that, you actually figure out, well, I've got some good ideas, and like maybe I do know something. And then once you've told someone else to do it, you're going to feel like a hypocrite if you don't do it yourself.
Right.
So this is another sort of social trick. Max would put us in these sort of advice-giving circles where the senior students are working with the junior, and he rarely gave advice, actually.
He more facilitated the experience for you to learn and create the answer within yourself, I guess, by helping others.
By helping others. And he would, he's nudging along the way
Yes.
and like, good job, or like maybe a little redirection. But, and if you go to him and you're like, I need to know how to do X, he tells you, but there wasn't a lot of backseat driving,
Sure.
if that makes sense. And I think that also helped build confidence. It made us believe in ourselves in those roles. And I now actually have an advice club of people who are former Max students. Maybe no accident. We sort of try to keep this going even beyond that point in our lives where he was coaching us. And each of us were at similar career stages, all professors, similar goals. And we reach out to each other for solicited advice whenever we're facing a challenge, a career challenge, and aren't sure what to do. And it's just been totally amazing. So it's this peer group of people who support each other, care about each other. There's friendship, and that's all built in. We see others achieving, and it helps us see,
That's
if
cool.
they can do it, I can do it. But then also we get to give advice, and we grow from that as well.
What would you say are the top 3 or 5 things that a coach can do to instill belief in someone else that you witnessed from him or that you've also seen with your peer group?
I think a lot of positive feedback is super important. That's like the predominant sense, is that this person thinks I'm doing great, even if they're also telling me ways I can improve, because you don't want to only, obviously, it's really important to also get, like a little more like this. You need that nudging, but it needs to be with a positive. Sometimes people call it a feedback sandwich, right? You start with the positive. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I do think that positivity and conveying they believe in you. I think creating social structure for you, which is one of the things Max did. There was sort of a whole ecosystem of other students and supporters and who were all striving towards similar goals, and instead of feeling like we were in competition with one another, it was very clear that we were all part of a team. Almost every email starts with "Hi team," right? These are academics all vying for jobs and to sort of achieve, and you could see it being very cutthroat and competitive. We weren't on a team, right? We weren't playing for
That's
a team,
cool. Yeah.
but we were a team. And that was how we saw ourselves. And then the structuring, everybody's structured to help others who are below them. It's sort of part of your role is working with them. So those are a few of the key things. I'm not sure I've hit your number.
Positive feedback, social structure, supporting the team.
Yeah, putting people in the role of advice givers or supporters and mentors.
I think you said he believed in you. He treated you like family, mentoring circles. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we have hit
so
the
great.
number you asked for.
That's great. I love that.
Those were the keys.
I love that. How does someone build confidence within themselves if they feel like they're not confident? Maybe they don't have this mentor, this social structure to instill that. They don't have the people around them. Are there ways we can build inner confidence without other people believing in us?
Yeah, I think, so first of all, I do think you can go out and find these people, even if you don't have them, and that we should proactively be creating those structures, right?
Yes.
So say you want to, I'm going to make up a goal. Say you want to run a marathon, right? A lot of people decide at some point in their life. Did you run a marathon?
No, yes. 2 days
Yesterday
ago, I
you
started training for my first marathon, which is in 3 months, which is a small window of training time, but it's very sore today. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I've made the commitment earlier in the year, but then the marathon keeps getting delayed with the COVID, but now it's happening in November. So
congratulations.
Well, I haven't finished it yet, but yes.
You're going to?
Yes, I will. Exactly.
I can see the confidence.
Exactly.
I know you'll do it.
I will.
That's really
But
exciting.
I'm surrounding myself with a coach, with a team of support people who've done it before, who are encouraging. Like, I'm not just saying I'm
You're
going to
not
go do this on my own.
Exactly.
I've never
Not
done it
downloading
before.
an app and
No.
saying it'll just be the app.
Because I know it's going to be challenging. I know it's something I've never done. It's something that has scared me my entire life. I know it's not supposed to be this easy, like walk in the park. It's a marathon. And so I've set up the structure and the accountability and the schedule to follow through on the action steps needed in order to set myself up for the best possible position for, staying healthy and finishing it and all these different things that I want to do for my goals.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You already know all of this.
Well, I'm a former athlete, so I've learned these things.
In the athletic zone, that's funny. I do, obviously I know you're a former athlete, but I do think we underappreciate, at least when we're young, how much those skills translate.
Oh,
and
man. It's
so many of the lessons about, how do you structure practice? What are the, in my book, I was a tennis player, so I talk a lot about like insights that actually came from that sport and then eventually influenced my research and understanding of, okay, if you want to build a habit, the best way to do it is not like standing in the same place, doing it exactly the same way every single time.
Sure.
That's never how you would practice in sports. And that would never work out when you're out on the field or out on the court, right? You've got to be in variable conditions and preparing for anything that
Worst
can
case
arise.
scenarios, yeah.
Right. And yet often, I think scientists and anyone who's trying to create structures and success make mistakes that if you looked at it like an athlete and you said like, well, how would an athlete tackle a parallel problem? We would know that's not going to work. Like it's too rigid. It's too much expectation of things being perfect.
Perfect, yeah.
Right.
You talk about habits and behavior. What is the difference between a habit and a behavior, and which one should we be focusing on more in order to get to where we want to be? Changing our behaviors or changing our habits?
A habit is a subset of behavior. It's a pretty narrow subset, actually, if you look at the like true scientific definition. So Wendy Wood of University of Southern California is I think the world's expert on habit, and she would define it pretty rigidly as something you basically do automatically without almost consciously realizing you're doing it, right? Like you sort of make the coffee in the morning with the coffee maker, you hit the buttons, you don't even remember.
You're just like
you shampoo your hair, right? And you're like, did I do the shampoo already? I was thinking about something else.
You drove to work and you don't know how you got there. You're like, what?
Because you're on autopilot, right? So that's like, those are the really rote activities, like you hand sanitize if you're working in a hospital and you didn't even notice you did it. Did I do that already? Those are habits. I think there's been a lot of excitement and growth of in the popular press, the idea that a habit is anything that you want to repeat. Mm-hmm. And I think that would actually, a lot of the things that we think of and that we talk about casually as habits are probably more in the category of routines, which is different. Like often it's like if you're going to the gym, is it really a habit? You probably remember deciding to go to the gym. Maybe you do it at a consistent time. Maybe you do it a lot. But I would start calling a lot of these things more like routines if you want to talk about the non-academic. At any rate,
sure.
A little bit like inside baseball, who cares? But I do think it's interesting there's distinction in the processes that drive one versus the other. I study behavior, which is like a super category. It's even above routines or habits where and it's just all behavior change requires different behaviors to happen. Some of them are going to be on autopilot, some of them are going to be routine, and some of them are one-time decisions that have big implications for your life. So I actually think having all of those categories in mind when we think about change is really important, as opposed to narrowly focusing on one or the other.
So what is the definition of a behavior?
Oh, that's an interesting, like what is a behavior? A behavior is an action you take. Like really everything is behavior. If it's inside your head, it's not a behavior, then it's like a judgment. But any actual action you take is a behavior. Any action you take.
So what are the most common behaviors that we have that I guess hold us back? And then what are the behaviors that
Okay, I thought you were going to go with most common. I was like, breathing.
No, the most common behaviors that hold us back.
Yeah.
And then the most common behaviors of the ultra high performers, successful, in business and sports, what are those behaviors that they tend to lean into?
Oh, that's so
versus the ones where people are stuck?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm trying to ask you questions you've never been asked here.
They're great.
That's my goal.
They're great. They're really great questions. Okay. let me start with some of the most common behaviors
That keep us stuck. Yes.
Yeah, I think common behaviors where we get stuck are, and this is like, what are the most common New Year's resolutions? They're to change those behaviors that we get stuck on. So the most common things we get stuck on are things related to our health, right? We aren't making good decisions about what we eat, what we drink, whether we smoke, whether we're physically active. Those are really common points where we get stuck. Our finances, right? Making good financial decisions on a daily basis about how we spend our money, how we save, who we give our money to. Those are places people often get stuck. We can get stuck in bad social loops. We sort of started by talking about relationships, so I think that's another place we get stuck. Whether it's we feel like we're too shy, we're not meeting enough people, we're meeting the wrong people, we're in the wrong relationships. That's another area where we get stuck. I think education and career are sort of, I'd put them, because they're like one follows the other, and that's another category. Like if you're a student, you're trying to achieve, but we often get stuck on not really studying rigorously and putting the time in and the focus in, and then that converts to work where we're not being as productive as we could be, we're not setting ourselves up for success. So I think those are some of the common categories that get us stuck. Yeah.
And what are the behaviors of the ultra performers or the elite who are accomplishing all their goals and pursuing their dreams? What are those behaviors that they do really well?
So I have never gone and interviewed the ultra performers and said, like, list for me all your behaviors. So instead of answering your question perfectly, what I'm going to do is tell you some of the behaviors that research shows lead to great outcomes. Yes. And then certainly I have seen lots of top performers where I go, oh, they're totally doing that. Yeah. It's great. So I think one of the most important things is like leaning on structure as opposed to expecting to just sort of follow the Nike just do it mantra. And by the way, when you talked about how you're training for your marathon, I noticed you immediately went to all the structures.
Schedule, structure, accountability, coaching, investing like money into it all, so there's more investment in it. So it's like you've got to show up.
Yes.
That is like, for me, it's so ingrained in me that if you want to accomplish your goals, you got to schedule these things you got to do on a daily basis and make it like.
Break it down. What's the daily goal?
What's the daily
When are you going to do it? What's going to cue you to do it? Who's going to watch you do it?
Everything.
What's
at stake for you? What's at stake for other people? What's the higher purpose that if you don't do this, who are you going to be hurting?
And who is literally holding you accountable,
Absolutely.
Right? You've got your coach involved. So those are the kinds of things.
So structure is one of the leading academic, the research that shows which will help you get more results.
Yes, and there's so many pieces of that, and like each one of them we could unpack and talk about studies from, okay, a big one is too often people say, I just have this big goal, this big, I think if I set a big audacious goal, and that, by the way, that's good, it's good to set stretch goals, but then you got to break it down, like into the, what are you going to do this week? What are you going to do today? What are those component parts? And people get a lot further. Research by Al Bandura, the late Al Bandura of Stanford, great thinker, sort of did some of the pioneering work on this. We just did a field experiment where we tested with thousands of people who wanted to be volunteering 200 hours a year, and they had committed to that goal. And we found that just sending them reminders not to volunteer 200 hours a year, but to volunteer 4 hours a week led to vastly better performance. Just that really simple change, even in the way you communicate about this. When you invite someone to start saving $5 a day instead of $150 a month, you get vastly higher take-up.
Interesting.
But it's identical. So just little framing shifts where you think about, let's break this down into the bite-sized component. Now it's harder to procrastinate on it. You can see how it's doable. It doesn't feel overwhelming.
So you're saying if my goal is to save $105 or invest $105 a month or whatever this is, are you saying it's not the best approach to say I'm going to invest $105 a month, but I'm going to do $5 a day?
Yeah, so 100. I
can't remember what the
scale is. It's 150 because it's like 30 days roughly in a month. Anyway.
$150, as opposed to saying I'm going to save or invest $150 a month, trick your brain into saying I'm going to invest $5 a day.
Right.
You're saying by doing that, what should happen? We should have
many more people raise their hand and say, I can do this.
As opposed to $150 is too big for some people.
It sounds big. You start thinking like, oh no, where am I going to have to cut? Like,
Yes.
that's a bit, like, I'm not going to get to go out to dinner 3 times that I thought I was going to get to go out to, am I going to make my rent? So you're like focusing on that big category, $150. And this was an experiment that was done, led by Hal Hirschfeld at UCLA with a savings app, Acorns. And they just invited people, either some people get randomly assigned, do you want to save $5 a day? Or $150 a month. It's literally the identical outcome. They will take $150 out of your account
monthly.
Yeah,
but
but they framed it differently, and you get vastly higher takeout.
Really?
Something like 5 times more people are interested. It just feels doable.
Yes.
And
I mean, it's like anyone can find $5 in their couch or like car, like the change. It's like, oh, I can do this every day, but $150 may be like a big stretch.
Right, but it is the same thing. And so that broken down goal is really important.
So it's like if you're working out, as opposed to saying, I'm going to run, I don't know, 50 miles a week, it's like, that may seem like a lot, but I can run, what is that broken down to? 3 miles, 4 miles a day, 4 miles a day, 5 miles a day. It's more doable than thinking about the big number, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. How could you apply that in another area of life, do you think? In terms of like fitness, in terms of finances, and what about like relationships? I don't know, is there...
I think you can break down most big goals into its component parts. It might not be as simple as like literally redoing the math, but it might be, you know, I want to have a better relationship and I want us to spend more quality time together. Let's try to spend a lot more quality time together this year. Well, first you can get more concrete, right, than a lot of. And so say you had a monthly goal, it might be like, okay, I want to make sure that we go on, you know, 5 just us dates a month to have that alone time. And you might say that means, you know, every Friday plus 1 Saturday, we're going to do it. And that means, you know, once a week plus 1 week that has 2 times. And let's go map out when they are. And it all becomes more bite-sized and achievable. And this is, again, you said you're like mapping out your schedules. These are the component parts that actually add up to achieving your goals.
And I would think of like, okay, what am I going to do this week? What am I going to schedule this week? Not like, I've got all this stuff to do for the next 3 months. Like, what can I do for the next few days? And what's coming tomorrow? And then, okay, I see the full week and how am I going to manage my time? And at the end of the week, wow, I can look at what I created and I can be proud of it and build for the next week.
Yeah. So that's really important.
Yeah, and time's going to keep passing. And in 3 months, you're going to look back and say, oh, look at all the steps I took to get to me where I'm at.
Absolutely.
Winning the LA Marathon. No, I'm just kidding. Just completing is the goal. Completing in 5 hours is my goal. Okay, so that's
breaking
leading
down
on structure.
Let me add another super important strategy that I think a lot of high performers use that research supports. And this one I think is vastly underappreciated too, and it sort of relates to what I was poking at earlier, like the just do it Nike. Like, no, that's not really right. I think this is really a misconception that's related to that. And this. The idea comes from research by Ayelet Fishbach of the University of Chicago and Caitlin Woolley of Cornell. And what they showed is that if you ask people when they have a big goal, what approach are they going to take to try to get to it? Most people say, like, I'm going to look for the most efficient route. It's all about efficiency. What's the most effective path to that end goal? That's how I go for it. And like a small fraction of people say something different. They say, I try to find a way that I'll enjoy getting to that end destination.
Have fun.
Have fun. So you could think about someone who wants to, we've been on marathons, say you're training for a marathon, you know, somebody who's like, I'm going to just go to the gym and get on the, on the treadmill and grind it out.
It's hard every day.
Yeah. And another person who's like, I'm going to go on a run with a running group. We're going to go through, you know, the most beautiful trails that I know. We're going to do it together. Maybe I'm even going to download some great reading material, listening material before I go so that I have something fun in my ears. Those are really different paths, right? Like this one might be more efficient because you don't have to coordinate with other people. You'll do it every day. You're gonna like know exactly your mileage. It's gonna be really controlled.
Yes.
But it turns out if you don't enjoy it, you don't persist. And so they've done experiments where they showed that if you just actually encourage people to choose the most fun way to pursue an exercise goal or study, they did this with students in math class, you know, giving them fun activities that were sort of going on in the background. You can use markers and play music and have snacks versus just grind it out. People achieve more because they persist longer when they find ways to make it fun to do.
That's crazy.
What's good for them. But we misunderstand this. We don't think we need that. We sort of think like, oh, that's kid stuff. Like, I'm just going to push through. And we're wrong. We won't, ultimately. And that's because of impulsivity, because we overvalue the present experience relative to the long-term gains. It's just how we're wired. We don't appreciate that. We don't appreciate that about ourselves, so we make these mistakes.
We'll probably quit more frequently when it gets harder and harder if there's no like daily joy or fun. If you're just like, I got 6 months, 12 months, 2 years until maybe this goal happens. This is exhausting, it's draining, it's pulling me away from having fun in my friendships or these activities. So it sounds like if you can make the challenging steps the fun activity in your day-to-day life, then you'll stick with it longer, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely, and I think it's so underappreciated.
Yeah, that's so true. What about, what else around structure? You said there's a bunch of subcategories within structure. The importance of having structure for high performers.
Yes. Okay. So another really key thing is having if-then plans.
I love that.
So this is based on research by Peter Gollwitzer of NYU, who studied the way different people were making plans around goals they wanted to achieve. And he found that some people sort of said, I will eventually do it, or I'll do it, I'll do it once a week. And other people laid out real detail in their plans. And they had sort of if-then statements like, if it is a Thursday at 4 p.m., then I will go train for my marathon in this location, as opposed to sometime this week I'll get around to it. The more structure, the more clear it was what's the cue that's going to trigger the behavior, the more follow through he was seeing. And then he started running a series of experiments where he would actually have people basically fill in the blanks, like fill in the if X happens, then I will do Y sentence instead of just saying I plan to do Y, and looked at what are the outcomes and saw this really matters. And it turns out we've done research showing that if people are prompted to just write down the date and time when they intend to get a flu shot, they're more likely to get a vaccine. If people are asked, when will you vote, where will you vote, how will you get there on a call, trying to encourage them to go to vote in an election, they're significantly more likely to show up. So these like very simple tricks are being used widely in healthcare now, in voter turnout, because it's so powerful to create those if-then plans instead of just sort of the flimsy ones to get to an end goal.
Gotcha. Okay. I like the if-then plans.
If-then plans are super important.
Okay.
Yeah. We haven't talked about tracking or accountability, although we've alluded to them.
Let's do it.
So those are other really important pieces of structure.
Tell me more.
So tracking does seem to be really useful in terms of achieving goals, because if you don't have visibility into whether you're, getting anywhere, it's hard to reward yourself, and rewarding yourself is part of sort of the loop that makes you keep feeling satisfied and doing something.
For the actual behavioral change to be implemented, right?
Exactly. So it's a really simple thing, but this tracking does seem to matter. One of my favorite studies of this shows it actually in water conservation, where people were taking showers that were long, and they were committed to conservation, but their showers were long, so that wasn't totally working out for them. And then they were randomly assigned to two groups. One group's getting something they know they're being monitored and someone else can see how much water they're using. The other group gets, a visual. They can literally see in real time how much water are they using.
3 minutes left, 2 minutes, whatever you have.
It wasn't a countdown. It was just showing total, total gallons used,
liters or gallons, whatever.
Right. So it's like really visible. It's going up. It's
You're
going up. It's going up.
You're wasting this much every moment. Yeah.
Right, and you can sort of think like, oh, how much did I use total yesterday? Right. So you can imagine that kind of thing.
It's like gamification.
Yeah, I'd say it's related to gamification, although there were no sort of stars and bells and whistles. It's more just I know where I am, and I have I know how much I've used.
I'm a horrible human being for wasting this much water. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah, I mean that might be the kind of thought.
Right.
Hopefully, it wasn't that extreme, because then it could come with negative. But it had a big impact.
Tracking and measuring. Okay.
Just having a sense, because then you can say like, I hit the goal, I did. You can make the goals more concrete that way. Like I'm going to do 10,000 steps a day. My little Fitbit jiggles, and it makes me happy. That's gamification. That jiggle gives me so much joy. But the tracking gives you visibility into how you're doing, and it's important. And then accountability, which you've mentioned a bunch of times, does absolutely the research supports when someone else who you care about, when they're holding you accountable, it matters because it changes the cost-benefit calculus of achieving your goals. And that
is there research around that proves that, or is it?
Yes, absolutely. When you're my favorite work. So this is in the category of what's called commitment devices.
Okay.
So it's a category that economists have been studying for decades because they find them really weird. So economists get really excited when they hear about commitment devices because they're like, these shouldn't exist. It breaks all our theories. A commitment device is when you create some sort of penalty or constraint on yourself. So we're used to the government doing that sort of thing, right? They put there's speed limits and they fine you if you're tempted to speed. And we're like, yeah, that makes sense. But what if you fine yourself or penalize yourself for not achieving your goals? That's crazy. Who would ever do that? And yet lots of us do, and it's effective. And someone who's holding you accountable is sort of like creating a penalty, because if it's now visible to someone else whether you've achieved more, you're going to feel shame if you don't. So that's the penalty. If it's invisible how you're doing.
Yes.
Now you could say also they're going to see the upside. So maybe it's not only a commitment device. That there's also an opportunity for pride and so on. But losses tend to loom larger than gains to us. Accountability tends to, I think, be most potent because of the sense that you don't want to fall down when someone's watching.
Right.
And commitment devices are generally extremely effective. The most effective ones are actually when you put money on the line.
Right.
So you can put cash down that you will forfeit if you fail to achieve a goal.
Right.
And
I love
research
that.
shows that helps.
That works.
It works really well. So
putting money down and saying, okay, I'm going to pay $1,000 to something I don't believe in if I don't accomplish this goal, or if I don't do the steps at least to get there by a certain time.
Exactly. And it's like,
That'll
wait.
incentivize you.
You incentivize yourself, which is very counterintuitive. Why am I finding myself? But it works. My favorite study is on smokers who wanted to quit. Half of them are given sort of your standard suite of stuff. Here's ways to quit. The other half are given all that stuff plus a commitment device. You can put money into this account for 6 months, and it'll disappear if you fail a nicotine or cotinine test in your urine at the end of 6 months. 30% higher quit rate in the group that just had the ability to put that money in there.
Now, someone once told me that you pay attention to what you pay for. And so in the coaching world, when you're investing in a book or you're investing in a coach, usually the more the investment in that book or program or coach, the more you want to pay attention to getting the result. Would that be similar to this study that's like, okay, if I put $100 in this thing, in 6 months if I stop smoking, people are like, $100 doesn't matter, but if I put $100,000 in, I'm going to pay attention because that's a lot more money that I don't want to lose.
You know what's really fascinating is it goes back to the very first thing we talked about, which is sunk costs, and the tendency we have not to ignore them. So, if you buy a book, it's sunk cost. You can't go return it. And well, maybe you can, but in most cases, if you dog ear it a tiny bit, or you're probably not going to return it. So you should ignore it. It's irrecoverable. It doesn't matter, but we don't. That's not how we're wired. And as a result of wanting to sort of recover that sunk cost, we do work harder when we feel like, oh, I've invested so much.
More
in this.
money.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a trick. It's sort of a mistake that we do it, but it works. And so let's hook into that and use it to motivate us to achieve more.
So the more at stake you have of your own, whatever, money or time or energy, the more likely you'll achieve that goal or make that change.
It's just, you can change the cost-benefit calculus moving forward. You can also, if you've invested in the past, then the sunk costs that we tend not to ignore will feel like they should change that. So there's sort of two ways, prospectively and retrospectively. You can put a bunch of money into something and then you're going to feel guilty if you don't do it.
Right.
Or you can use these commitment contracts where you literally put money on the line on, say, a website, one of these Stick or BeMinder, that you'll have to forfeit if you don't achieve your goal in the future.
Wow.
They're both tactics that can work for different reasons.
Why do you feel like so many people... Oh, actually, I was going to ask you about this. With people putting penalties on themselves, even if they don't have accountability or it's not a public commitment or something like that, if we say we're going to do something and then we break our word to ourselves, does that shift our identity, or does that keep us in a lower level identity of less confidence, less belief in themselves? But actually, when we keep our word, we increase the level of self-esteem and confidence, whether people know about it or not. Like, how does that affect our belief in ourselves or our confidence?
It's a really interesting question. So, and specifically, you're saying when we fail and it's visible to others versus when we fail and it's invisible, how does that change our confidence?
It's more like when we say we're going to do something and we don't take those actions, and we constantly, I say I'm going to work out 5 days a week, but I'm going to do 1 day, and I keep saying I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and then I keep not doing it. How does that affect our belief in ourselves and our confidence when we continue to break our own word to ourselves?
Got it. Yeah, that's as you the premise of the question is right.
Yes.
Like it's not good for our confidence to continually fail. We do have a really amazing, what Dan Gilbert of Harvard has called a psychological immune system, where we sort of figure out ways to still end up satisfied and somewhat happier than maybe we would if we took everything at face value. So we can bounce back. And I actually think fresh starts and the fact that the fresh start effect exists may be related to sort of the psychological immune system for all the failure that we constantly fail at our goals. Goals are hard to achieve. Yeah. Most of them we fail at. And we have built these ways to sort of stand up again and say, okay, but this time it's going to be different. And it's probably a good thing by and large. But of course, it's not perfect. And the more we fail, the more difficult it is for that psychological immune system to win.
And what about the more we keep our word to ourselves, do we build more confidence and self-esteem and momentum towards achieving other goals as well, the other way?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Especially if we're tracking and we can sort of give ourselves that pat on the back, if it's visible to others, sort of the more things that reinforce what we're achieving, I think the better in terms of giving us that boost and confidence. And it's interesting, there's some new work that's starting to be done on the power of streaks and visible streaks and sort of seeing like
momentum,
exactly. Gotcha. Like if you there's apps like Duolingo, it's just trying to get people to learn a new language, and they're really making it prominent to you. Look, you've done it 5 days in a row, keep the streak going, and they're really trying to play into that momentum. And psychological momentum and streaks, they do build and they make us feel like, okay, I don't want to lose what I've achieved and accomplished, and that's very motivating.
Okay. What would you say is the number one thing we need to know about changing our behavior for the better?
That is a big question. I think the number one thing is like a high level thing as opposed to a tactic.
Yes.
And that high level thing is really what I built my book around. And that is the importance of not just sort of taking any of these different tactics off the shelf willy-nilly that we've been talking about, but trying to figure out what are the barriers for you and match the tools that you put together to build your strategy to what's holding you back. So if you're struggling with, I just dread doing this activity, then find a way to make it fun. If you don't believe you can, then you need a new social structure and set of supports. And like maybe everybody could benefit a bit from all of these things. If you're procrastinating, create a commitment device, like fine yourself if you put it off any longer so that you'll no longer consider doing that. So what is the barrier? And then make sure you double down on creating the structures that will be relevant to it. Because everything we've talked about is good. It's all useful on average. That's what you're going to get the most out of.
So how do we create an assessment for ourselves to see what we need the most of? Maybe we feel like you're not procrastinating, but actually we are procrastinating. Maybe we feel like we're a confident person, but actually lack confidence. Or maybe you feel like you're not lazy, but actually you are. Like, how do we? What's the assessment? What's the list of questions to ask ourselves, or just things to be aware of, so that we know, okay, I need to dive into like the confidence problem and start applying these things, or I need the commitment devices.
Yeah, you're like, and you've got my book's chapters are organized, you've got them open in front of you. And I organized the book very intentionally around sort of, these are the different barriers, and here's what all the science says about how to overcome them. And so we've been jumping around across chapters. One of the things that I think is really wonderful about this particular topic is that I don't think there's as much self-deception here as there is in other domains. I think it's easier to diagnose just from a very simple understanding of what the barriers are. Almost like if you look at the table of contents in my book, you'll see yourself in it, or read a page, and you'll understand, like, what do I mean by laziness? I mean, like, you're taking the path of least resistance. You tend to fall back on habits. Okay, if it's like bad habits that are really getting in your way, then here's the set of strategies. So I don't think there's as much self-deception. I think it's fairly straightforward, and people will see themselves quickly in their own challenges.
What's the biggest thing you want to change in your life right now?
Oh my God, I have to choose the biggest. There's so many. I do a lot of me search, by the way. Like this whole career, a lot of it like came from realizing that I wasn't optimizing in my own life, and that there were hacks and scientific strategies that could be applied to improve. And I'm constantly. Anyway, I think there's sort of like two categories of scientists who study this stuff. The superhumans, and they are out there, who are like so self-controlled and amazing. And they look around at like all the little ants around them and they're like, what's wrong with you? This is so peculiar. Let me study it. And then there's the other group, which I fall into, which is the people who are sort of like, God, I'm a mess.
Let me improve myself.
Yes.
What's the solution?
Yeah, like let's find scientific. So I'm the messy category. Right now, I think the thing that I am struggling with most is work-life balance. And it's been a really tough year on that for so many reasons. I have a 5-year-old who was out of school for a long time and he was doing homeschool pre-K, which, you know, over Zoom goes about as well as
it's every 5 minutes. It's like, oh, get back on there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. It's about as tough as anyone would imagine, Zoom pre-K. So that was tough. And then I had this book that I wrote and was really, you know, I put so much of myself into, and that was a tug. And then I do research primarily about health behavior change. And in the last year and a half.
And your health is struggling, yeah.
Well, we've needed some health behavior change in the world as the global pandemic struck. I've studied vaccines and encouraging people to take vaccines, and I felt like there was more need for my expertise than ever before, and that I wanted to give as much as I could. And I have lost work-life balance to some degree, like, you know, many late nights at the computer instead of stepping back. Many missed, like, you know, outings with family because this is so important. I have to do this now.
Your mission is important.
Yeah. But there has to be a balance. And so that, I think, is the biggest thing I'm trying to change.
What would you fall into then? Which category would you want?
Procrastination.
Procrastination towards spending more time taking care of your health and being with family and downtime. So procrastinating, being lazy. Not that way, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's true. We all have our own.
Relaxing.
I've talked about the idea of wants and shoulds.
Yes.
So wants being like the things that provide us with sort of more the instant hit of gratification, and shoulds being the things that are good for us in the long run. But they're not always candy and salad, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes some of us get mixed up on those wants and shoulds. And for me, the want this year has always been like, I feel like I have this mission, and it has overtaken some of the things that are really important and really should be at the center. You know, having a 5-year-old, having a family, and making sure that that's a priority. So having more balance is my biggest challenge right now.
So the procrastination problem, is that what it is? What in that chapter on the procrastination problem, what tool should you be looking at more, and how should you be applying that tool from the moment you leave this interview for the next couple months? How could you integrate that tool into your life?
I think accountability and commitment are some of the things that are probably the most powerful here. So one of the studies that I talk about in that chapter has to do with pledges and the power of doctors who were overprescribing unnecessary antibiotics to their patients, ended up doing that less so when they put a formal pledge up in their office saying, you know, when you come in, you've got a stuffy nose and you're begging me for your antibiotic. I don't do that. It's not recommended by the, you know, by best practice, and I follow best practice. This is not what I should be doing. That pledge reduced that dramatically. I think sort of pledges, my partner is someone who I can have holding me accountable, setting hours and sort of planning around what are those hours and what are they going to be allocated to? Like, am I really going to work on Friday and Saturday night until 11 p.m. instead of taking time for myself and my family? Those are the kinds of tools, and sort of I've already instituted this in part because of these issues. Like, my phone goes away during dinner with my family. When we're out doing activities, it needs to be away, because otherwise I'll be tempted to check and see, is there something coming up from work that I should be responding to? So it is a little bit backwards, but the tools apply whether or not the things that are tugging you in the wrong direction are pizza and junk food or work.
Right. So what is, have you already been implementing all these things, or is it something you need to have a conversation
I'm implementing some of them, but not as many. I'm about to have a fresh start. So Friday, tomorrow is a Friday, and then I go on a vacation. with my family for a week,
There you
which
go.
I'm really looking forward to. I haven't had a vacation in I don't know how long.
I just had one 2 weeks ago, and I don't know, it was like, I can't remember the last time. Years? 5 years? I don't know.
Feels like years. Also, pandemic
Yeah.
stretches out
Yeah.
time taffy.
You know something I did that was an incredible, I don't know if this is possible for you, but this is probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was like, I really feel like I need to get away on a vacation. And I realized at the time, for 15 years of my life, because I got a cell phone when I was 17 or 16 or something, for 15 years of my life, I had my cell phone on me every single day. Like there was never a day I didn't have my phone near me at some point. Like I checked it every day and I was like, that just doesn't feel right. Like to always at least one point in the day, I touched my cell phone for 15 years. And I said, what's the thing that scares me that I think could help a reset? And my producer at the time, Christine, she was like, I was like, I'm gonna go to Hawaii, and what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna leave the phone in the hotel room when I go out. And she's like, what would it look like if you didn't take your phone or computer with you on the plane? And I was like, I don't even know if I could do that, but I actually ended up doing that for 5 or 6 days, left all electronics at home, and it was the scariest thing the first day, but then it was like freedom.
Freeing.
It
It's
felt
amazing.
incredible.
That's how I take vacations too.
Really, you leave all the stuff at home,
I don't bring a computer. I normally do bring my phone,
but it's like
but I
stored
actually
away in the safe.
Stored away in a safe, and I take email off of it. So
Smart.
like you know,
social media and email or whatever.
right, all the things that would be a drag, they're gone.
It's just a phone.
It's just a phone.
It's just
that can
call
be
me
used.
and that's it.
Yeah. So no, I think that's absolutely critical, and that's a commitment device, right? You've
Mm-hmm.
put constraints on your own access to things that would tug you into a place that's not good. You'd be tempted to do this thing that's not good for you. You've created a commitment device when you
Interesting.
right, and it is weird. Like you are constraining access to tools that you normally value. That is a very weird thing if you sort of step back and think about it, but it helps. And there's a
huge.
lot of ways we can create constraints that help us achieve more.
What about non-negotiables? Like creating a non-negotiable, like for dinner, non-negotiables, I put my phone away, or on Friday at 6 o'clock, I turn my phone off for the weekend.
Totally.
Is that something that works in this, or is that?
Absolutely. It absolutely works in this. That's a kind of commitment device, sort of that is a commitment device. Those are boundaries, rules,
Okay.
constraints. And I've got it down for dinner. I mostly have it down during the day on weekends. My real remaining problem is like late nights once my son is in bed. And then
After dinner, you're back and working until midnight. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, those are things I'm working on.
Interesting. Okay.
What are you working on?
Oh man, what am I working on right now? I think I put a lot on my plate. I have a lot of big goals and big dreams and aspirations with my mission in terms of the people we want to reach and impact, with the business goals, building the team, financial goals, with my health, and like, okay, I was training with the USA national team for the last 9 years to try to make the Olympics in team handball. And that's just a big time commitment to now it's like, okay, I'm taking on the marathon, and then being in intimate relationships and wanting to spend quality time with, people, and having friendships and just travel. And it's just so many, wanting to write a book that I was talking about. It's like, well, it's okay. A lot of the big goals, and seeing like, how can I continue to not limit myself? So expanding the plate in which I can add things to it, but also feel a sense of peace and balance with the expansiveness. So what does that look like? Empowering teams, or maybe letting go of certain things that aren't as important and focusing on the other things. Having seasons of my life where, okay, for the next 3 months, I'm not going to do this and this because I'm going to go all in on these two things, but I can come back to it in 3 months, and trying to manage that process. Yeah, so.
I love that.
And it's like, I'm also taking Spanish lessons 3 days a week because I want to be fluent in Spanish. It's like all the things that I'm trying to do.
You sound like a workaholic too.
I'm a passionate human that wants to develop more skills to serve the world better. And also, being in therapy and learning about myself more and healing and all this stuff, it's like I want to do a lot. So it's figuring out how to manage it all while not like letting people down or upsetting people, and
Yeah.
just all of it.
Yeah.
So the opportunity is, how do I continue to set up structure, accountability, schedule, and and also eliminate things that aren't important for me to do in my business. Like, okay, why am I holding on to doing these tasks that I don't need to be doing? So it's kind of like eliminating tasks that aren't as meaningful for my skills by bringing in other people to support with that, letting go of things that I've maybe done for years that have helped me get here, but won't help me get there. You know what I mean? It's kind of letting go of those things that you've been used to doing, that I've been used to doing, and that I'm good at, but I don't need to do anymore.
Yeah.
So it's constantly in that, and like
moving from sous chef to master chef.
Right, exactly. Where it's not like, well, I'm so used to writing all my social media and so used to replying to comments on all my emails, but it's like, I don't need to do that. I should be more strategic thinking and creating the menu or whatever, not like doing the, like pounding the fish and like making the rice or something, so.
And thank you for sticking with
You know what I mean? I'm trying to stick with your analogy here. Yeah, so making the miso soup or whatever it is, yeah. So it's eliminating certain tasks and doing the bigger strategic things, only the things that I could do. Like, I should focus on being a great interviewer and like building the relationships with the guests and making it a great episode. I shouldn't be doing everything else around it.
It's
You know what I mean?
a really interesting point, and we haven't talked about this yet, but I love that you took us into sort of prioritization and how many things at once. And one of the most interesting studies that's been done on planning, and like we talked about if-then plans earlier, in the last decade, I think was a study that showed if you actually make too many if-then plans, and too many is like 2+, it's harmful.
Give me an example again of an if-then plan.
So it's like, it's just mapping out the details, really, of how you're going to get, with a marathon. Like, what am I going to do when for this goal on each day of the week? When you start doing that for a bunch of goals, you sit down and do them all at once.
It's a lot.
It's overwhelming,
It's too
and
much.
you get demotivated. It's too much. And you talked about the seasons of your life, which I think is a beautiful way of describing one of the strategies that can get around this problem that has been pointed to, and that is like, one at a time, do the planning.
Yes.
And then we talked about routines and putting things sort of on autopilot, like Spanish lessons. Probably at some point you had to sit down and make a plan, like, how am I going to become fluent at Spanish?
Exactly. And I schedule it at 8 a.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And it's like, I've got it scheduled. I paid for the teacher in advance. So I put the money in. I got it scheduled on my calendar for the whole year or for seasons of time. I actually might take like the month off because now I'm doing marathon training and I'm like,
Can you do everything at 8 a.m.?
Well, that's going to be done. Well, then I got to get 6:30 a.m. And can I transition fast enough? Probably not. And also do 2 interviews a day and have energy and focus and clarity. And when I have a dinner 2 nights a week with friends, like maybe not.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay.
So sometimes you deprioritize. I was actually going to say you like had it set up and then you could move to sort of add the next thing.
Right.
But once you've already got that going. But it's also really great to know when you have to take it off. And then you know how to come back to it, and it'll probably be easier to start up again because you've got the plan.
And I know this will be done in November. So it's like, okay, the marathon's over in November. It's 3 months. It's a season. I look at my life in seasons always since I played sports. I couldn't play football and basketball at the same time. You've got to be all in on that sport for that season. Now, I did do track and baseball in the same season one time. It was very challenging.
That's tough.
I would run track meets, and then I would go pitch in baseball games and just pitch games my junior year in high school. And it was doable, but I wasn't at the highest level at either one. I was good. I was effective, but I wasn't the best I could be at either one. And that's why I also like, okay, I'm going to be doing this marathon. Something I need to schedule, create new time somewhere else, or let go of something for the next 3 months, or do it less, something like that, and know that I'm not going to be able to give my best potentially, so that I can at least not kill myself in a marathon. It's like, so that's the way I look at it. And there's in sports, inside of a season, there is typically a preseason, the season, the playoffs, and then the postseason. And the postseason is always a time to reflect, do I want to do this next year? Do I want to retire from this? What are my goals for next year? How am I going to train to prepare for the preseason and then the season? And I think that's always a good time as well, is to take that time, whether that's the holidays where you take time to reflect on the next year, the fresh start, to see what are my goals again.
And there's lots of fresh starts in sports, and I think it's no accident, right? Including like, and then your season to date statistics reset, like so many things that give you the chance to have that clean slate. It's it's really interesting hearing you talk also about the two. I was a tennis player, which comes up a fair amount in the book because there's a lot of lessons from that sport that have shaped my research. But I also found it hard to be all in on multiple things. I played very seriously and played Division I, but I actually quit tennis about halfway through college when I realized I wanted to be an academic. And it was just too many competing pressures to do. I could do school well enough, to get good grades. But when I realized that's what I wanted to commit my life to, I didn't want to have a second priority of, playing Division I sports.
Where did you play again?
At Princeton.
Princeton, wow.
Not
still
Stanford.
competitive.
Not Stanford.
Yeah, still competitive.
It was a serious.
D1 is still competitive.
Yeah, no, it was a serious.
Competitive.
It was a serious,
And it takes, and you can't compete at Division I level with an hour and a half of training a day. You can't.
No.
Can't.
Just, many hours a day. It's a huge commitment, right? And
Yes.
taking certain kinds of classes that meet in the afternoon wasn't really feasible, and to do it all well, if you want to really excel at everything, I found at the very highest level, to me, I wanted more focus.
Yes. Or it's like, okay, I'm going to be an elite tennis player. I'm going to be elite in academics and have no friends and family.
Right, that's right. Like something had to go. And that's a good point. I also wanted to have a social life.
Yeah.
So I could have crossed that out and I could have done it all.
And I think you could do that. Like when I was in college, I really didn't have much of a social life. I didn't have one sip of alcohol. I didn't do any drugs. I didn't do anything because I was so committed to obsessing over sports. I should say I had more of a social life than I had an academic life because I didn't put any energy into academics. I was like, I'm not that good at this. I don't care about school. I care about, girls and sports was like kind of the main thing when you're in college, right? And that was like, okay, let me go all in.
For me, those were the main things.
Yeah, exactly. But it was like obsessive over the goal. And I had to put so much energy and thought. I would go to sleep for about 45 minutes to an hour before every night. I would watch videos of the greatest athletes in that sport. And then I did a decathlon my senior year, and I would just watch pole vault videos over and over again. I visualize myself at night before going to bed of me being able to look and have the form of these other athletes going upside down and over the pole. And I would just obsess about it. It's
but
like
you have to put your whole self into that, right? And that's the seasons.
And I knew it was a season. I was like, okay, the national championships is 6 months away. That's the goal. I got to qualify for that. And so I got obsessed otherwise, then it's done. I'm graduating school. So I think we got to look at our life like that in the seasons as well. And really, I love the research behind the accountability and the commitment, the pledges. I think that's a really cool idea. How could we apply pledging in our, life around a relationship, your finances, or your health?
Well, actually, interestingly, society is already set up with a lot of pledges involved in relationships without, us even getting involved, right?
I'm engaged, I'm married, this is my boyfriend,
right.
I'm not single anymore.
Right, we're talking about, sunk costs, wedding rings,
right.
These things are all related, right? It's interesting that these structures have bubbled up, even though the research that sort of proves how effective they are came decades, hundreds of years later in many cases.
Really?
But, a lot of the things that exist that help us be true to each other, or even if you think about taking professional pledges when you become a doctor, the Hippocratic Oath, a lot of these kinds of pledges, that they're already there. But one thing the research points to is, can we build more of them? And how can we use them, and how can we create ways that even when there isn't a structure, right? Even maybe you're not going to get engaged to your coach in this marathon, because that's not a thing in marathons. But is there something from that idea that you can build? Like, can you commit or pledge to each other in some way that will make your commitment to each other more meaningful and more powerful? So anyway, it is interesting to see how society and has already built some of this in, and then think, can we take inspiration from it and from the research to build more of it in other places? Right.
Can you talk to me about temptation bundling and what temptation bundling is and how we can utilize it for our lives?
Yes. This is the very first bit of me-search I did.
Me-search, I like it.
This is my me-search. This idea came, and then I got to this field later. I was a graduate student actually getting a PhD in computer science and business, which was the classwork was not that fun, I will admit.
No.
There were a lot of classes I had to take that were tough, a lot of problem sets, and I was exhausted when I would come home, like so focused all day and like trying to understand what everybody was saying and make sense of all these different, to me it was almost like a different language to think that way. So I'd come home, I was tired, I didn't want to pick up my problem sets and get the work done. All I wanted to do was what any sane person wanted to do, like curl up on the couch and binge watch TV.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like any reasonable human. I was also a former athlete, and like feeling physically healthy and active was important to me for, identity, mental health, physical health. But I couldn't drag myself to go to the gym, which I also knew I needed to be doing because I was just so drained. And I realized there was a way maybe I could solve those problems all at once. What I started doing, and I'm certainly not the only person who had come up with this solution, but I might be the only person who's named it and studied it, is I decided I was only going to let myself enjoy indulgent entertainment while I was exercising at the gym.
Right. So if I really want to watch the Kardashians, I need to be on a treadmill or doing it here where I can enjoy it while moving my body.
You got it. So
Gotcha.
for me, turns out I've already admitted I'm a nerd, so no one's going to be surprised to hear this. And also, like, I can only handle so much sensory input. So I did it with audio novels.
Yes.
I couldn't do TV was like too much. I couldn't follow the characters and everything.
Yeah.
So James Patterson, Alex Cross style, actually Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter and like Voldemort. What's going to happen next? So I would only let myself listen to those books at the gym, and I would find myself then coming home from this long day of classes craving a trip to the gym.
Excited. Yeah.
So excited. What's going to happen to Alex Cross next? Is he going to get, is he going to escape? Is he going to get the bad guy? And then I'd get to the gym, time would fly while I was there, because the workout isn't painful, it's fun. I didn't even notice. Sometimes I worked out too long because I wanted to hear what happens next. And then I come back, when I'm done, I'm refreshed, I'm rejuvenated, I've had my break, I was ready to dive into my classwork, and I turned around, my grades improved a lot, thank goodness, because I was having a tough time there for a little while in grad school. And it was just all better because I had figured out by linking a chore with a temptation, I could make it fun. And we already talked about the importance of making it fun for persistence. This is just a tactic for doing it. So I've since done research showing I'm not that weird. A lot of my research is like, oh, look, I'm not weird. It works for other people too. So we ran large randomized controlled trials and showed that teaching people to temptation bundle, giving them temptations to hook with a chore improves outcomes in terms of exercise. You can think about porting it to other places, like only listen to this podcast if it's somebody who loves your podcast while you're, cooking your family a homemade meal, or while you're catching up on household chores, or while you're going for a run. What is the thing that you sometimes don't do, put off because it's not instantly gratifying? Can you link something you love with it? A snack you only let yourself pick up when you're heading to hit the books. Social. Make it social can be a way to make something fun, right? That can be the temptation bundle. I only get to see my best friend when we're going for neighborhood walks and getting in our
That's cool.
Our morning exercise, right? Like what and we'll gossip only at that time. That's where we'll reserve the gossip for the exercise walk. So what are the ways that you can find something that you love, hook it to something?
The guilty pleasures with a healthy habit.
You got it.
When is the best time to start a new habit?
Yeah, this comes back, I think, to what we were talking about with fresh starts and these chapter breaks. And so psychologically, those break points are a great time for starting something new because we have that renewed enthusiasm, optimism, the ability to say, okay, I couldn't do it last time, but I can be optimistic now because I've turned the page on a new chapter. But actually, another thing that can help beyond just that psychological chapter break is a physical change, especially if a habit that's not such a good one has been associated with a place or location.
So like you went through a breakup and you were living with the person for a year or 2 or 10 years. It's actually moving into a new physical location and kind of creating a new environment and fresh start by physically moving. Is that what you mean?
Totally. And that's going to sort of any of the things that had you in a rut that you want to sort of rip away, it's going to be easier to pull them apart. I think the easiest example would be like, say you have a habit of picking up a Dunkin' Donuts on the way to work every morning, like, 3 donuts, and you realize like that's maybe not great for me, or even 1, maybe not great for you. Sorry if that's news to anyone.
Yeah.
So you want to break that habit. If you're like moving to a new job, you are literally not going to walk by the same Dunkin' Donuts on the way to work.
Right. Or if you take a different route.
If you take a different route, you can give yourself a fresh start. But so you can create changes that make it easier to break habits if you move out of living with, right? So just think about how, this is an insane example, but you're in a relationship with someone, it's not working out. You could imagine you don't move out, you just say like, well, we'll cohabitate and we'll like move into different rooms. That would be a terrible idea. Terrible idea, right? And like that's part of the thing that we do when we're trying to change other habits is basically like still living with the environment that was holding us back.
Right.
So thinking about, are there breaks in the environment that can help shape change is great. And there's this research by Wendy Wood showing that when college transfer students, when they're transferring to a new college in a totally new community versus just like basically going down to a different, they're still living in the same environment with the same habits and friends and just going to a different, I used to go to this college down this street, now I'm going to that college.
Right.
The more disruption there was to your environment, the more that habit disruption came along with it. And people were able to build better and different exercise routines and
really, like improvement in change would happen.
Right.
When you
more easily when there's that shift.
The drastic change, the drastic physical change, the environment change.
Yeah.
Interesting. Huh. So moving like in a different state or a different climate or a different just like all around environment will help you shift those.
Or a different job,
Gotcha.
a different set of place you hang out, whatever it is, the physical change can actually sort of help in addition to that fresh start psychological change.
That's cool.
Is what I think the research points to.
And this is Wendy Wood's research that you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Sounds like someone I should interview.
You should interview Wendy Wood. She's amazing.
Do you know
She's
her
down
well?
the street. Yes.
She's here.
Everybody I've talked about. One of the things that's
heard of her.
really fun about behavioral science is we have this, I co-direct this initiative with Angela Duckworth called the Behavior Change for Good Initiative. And we have 150 scientists in our network around the world who all study behavior change and have their different areas of expertise. Wendy is...
Adam and Ethan are in there too, I think.
Exactly.
I think Adam, Ethan told me about this, Yeah,
and Wendy's
cool.
down the street at USC and she wrote a great book, Good Habits, Bad Habits.
I'll have to read that, yeah. Okay, cool. What else do we need to know about behavioral change to support us in accomplishing and achieving our goals?
Trying to think
besides
of
everything in your book.
We've covered a lot.
Yes.
We've covered a lot of ground. We talked about it at a high level, but I want to come back to something we talked about at a high level that I think is one of the most important insights in the book, and that is flexibility. And I think we should talk a bit about flexibility. Maybe we should even talk also a little bit about recovering from failure.
Oh, I like this. Yes, let's talk about it.
Okay, so to talk about flexibility, I'm going to tell you about an experiment that surprised me. And maybe now I've told you it surprised me, so I won't set you up and ask you to guess, because you'll know.
Okay.
I ran this experiment because I thought I knew enough about habits to help people form lasting habits with a tactic that ended up not working. So it was an experiment I ran at Google. I ran it with John Bashirs of Harvard Business School and a few other collaborators. We wanted to get Googlers to build a lasting exercise habit. So we had 2,500 of them who signed up. They all said, I'm in, I want to build it. It was called the Fresh Start Challenge. It's the beginning of the new year. They're all ready to go to the corporate gym more regularly. And we randomly assigned them to different groups. We thought we had a formula for helping them build a lasting habit based on sort of a month program. We were going to get them to kickstart this habit during this month. Okay, so one group is told, we want to focus you on consistency in your routine. You tell us the ideal time for you to work out. They say 7 a.m. We say, great. You're going to go to the gym at 7 a.m. as consistently as possible. You'll only be rewarded when you hit the gym right at around 7 a.m. Go for it. You're a 7 a.m. workout person for a month. And after a month of this sort of reinforcing that, you're going to have a habit and we're going to let go and we'll see that you keep doing it. Okay. The second group, we say, okay, what's your ideal workout time? Let's make your plan. Say this person says 7 a.m. too. And we say, great, 7 a.m. is a good time. Go 7 a.m. sometimes, but we want you to mix it up. Go whenever you want. Just do it a lot for the next month. And when the month is over, we think you'll have a lasting habit. Flexibility is key. We thought the people who we got going consistently, we thought that was probably better.
Consistency is the best way.
That's
if you
what
do
we
it consistently every time, every day, you're going to be able to stick this habit.
You're going to be a robot.
Right.
You're going to keep going. Yes, a machine. Machine is better than a robot.
Yes.
So we thought that was the thing to do. both groups in our experiment, ended up going to the gym at the same frequency during this month-long kickoff period, but in different patterns. The group that we'd said routine, 85% of their workouts are at the same time. The group we'd said flexibility, only half of their workouts are at that same time. So then we let go. The month where we've been really, holding their hand is over. And what we really care about is who's going afterwards, like who's built a habit that lasts.
For the next month, 6 months, year, whatever.
Year, yeah. We're looking at the data and we're sure it's the routine people. We analyze the data. It's not.
Flexibility.
Flexibility
is key, not consistency is key.
Flexibility was key. And we're like, what? What's going on? So we dig in, we're analyzing this data. We're like, what's going on? The people who had gone more consistently at their regular time, they did keep going a little bit more often at their special time. So if you're a 7 a.m. person, you're going a little bit more at 7 a.m. if you were in that rigid group than if you're in the flexible group. But they're rigid. That's the key word.
It's almost like if you miss that time, I'm not going at all.
That's right.
I missed the day. So I'm not going to go at noon or 5 or 7.
They don't go if they miss their 7 a.m. That's it. They give up on themselves. It's an only under these circumstances kind of habit. The flexible people, they go a tiny bit less at their regular time, but if they miss that time, they have another time. They have a backup plan. They have a backup plan after that. So they're going to the gym more net because they've built this flexible strategy. Like they have their first best, their second best, and their third best. They've built a no matter what habit, if you will.
I'm going to do this at midnight if I have to, or 11 p.m. And just as long as I get it in.
They've learned how to roll with the fact that life is not consistent.
Not perfect, yeah.
And so, they have a most regular time, but they also have a next best time and so on, instead of an only rigid routine. And I thought this was so interesting to me, and I write about this in the book. It brought me back to tennis. Because, and we sort of talked about this a little bit earlier when I was saying flexibility, you never practice a sport only under perfect conditions. Right? Like I never trained and hit forehands, always standing at the baseline, perfectly aligned. Like, I did some of that. The sun shining at 78
degrees, yeah.
Yeah, but if that's all you do in your training regimen, you're hosed, because that's not what you're going to find in the real, when you're
environment.
When you're out on the court in a real match. You're going to have to be able to run backwards and forwards and have the sun in your eyes at a different angle. And so I think that's what we learned from that. That's so important if we're trying to build good habits, if we're trying to build routines that will last, to understand that we need to, have a first best, but have a second best and third best, and practice being flexible as we're trying to build up that performance. So you're actually talking about I think it's different if you're meeting with your Spanish coach at 8 a.m. every day. There's nothing wrong with that. But probably practicing Spanish and saying, I'm always going to do it at 5 p.m. And otherwise, no matter what, sometimes there's no one holding you accountable. You're not meeting, with your tutor.
Sure.
So you're going to want to say, like, I'll try for 5 p.m.
Right. But I'm going to practice at some point. Yeah.
I'll practice at some point. Even if 5 p.m. falls apart, then I've got my 9 p.m. backup plan.
Right. Or if life happens and I want to do a dinner at 5 with someone, friend, and then I can do it afterwards or before. So
it's related to failure.
Yeah.
Which was the other thing I said we hadn't talked about. Because flexibility is about
you don't fail. Because you can shift it.
Exactly.
Whereas if I have to do it at 7 a.m. and I don't make it and I'm done for the day, I failed. That's interesting. So tell me more about failure. That was the next thing you were to say, right?
I think some of the first of all, I think the thing I want to study most next, and sort of that I think is the most important understudied topic in my field, is recovery from failure. And that, of course, we've got Carol Dweck thinking about like failure is growth. And I'm saying Angela Duckworth thinking about grit. It's not like it isn't studied. I just think there's so much that we need to know, because almost inevitably we fail when we're trying to achieve anything ambitious.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't get back up again. And
Why
figuring
is that
out is
Why
so
do we
important.
not get back up? Because it's so defeating, or it's deflating, or we told people we were going to do this and then we let them down, or we let ourselves down, or
all of the above, all of the above, or we don't have a growth mindset, or we think maybe something else will be easier.
We're perfectionists, and so then we procrastinate if it's not perfect, or
there's a million reasons. That's one of the challenges, and that's what makes it so hard to solve. But we know a little bit, and flexibility seems to be one of the key things. Having a growth mindset, so you can say that failure isn't diagnostic of me, but it's an opportunity to grow and learn, and I can get better and do better the next time. So these are some of the things, but I think we need a lot more.
Right.
One study I really like, and I'm talking a lot about exercise studies, even though it's just a part of this world, but there's a lot. It's like the fruit fly of habits, like going to the gym. Marissa Sharif, who is a professor at Wharton with me, has this really cool research on what she calls emergency reserves. I call them mulligans. She wanted to work out every day. So she was doing some research and she realized, okay, I want to set a tough goal like every day. That's good for me, but sometimes I'm going to fail. And she knew about something else called the what the hell effect. It's well aptly named. When you have a small goal failure, people often throw up their hands and give up and then, abandon completely.
Small goal failure.
Yeah, so like I'm only going to eat 1,500 calories today. That's my goal. And then I see donuts in the coffee room. I eat it, and then I'm like, what the hell? And then I have pizza.
Everything,
I go crazy. So that's the what the hell effect.
Yeah.
It was originally studied related to dieting. I'm not saying it's healthy to have those kinds of goals, but anyway, that's where it was studied. So we do this what the hell effect thing all the time. So she was like, how do I balance these two problems if I want to have a tough goal? But if I have a tough goal, I'm going to have some goal failures, and I'm going to get what the hell, and I'm going to quit. So she came up with this strategy for herself, which she then studied both with productivity and also with exercise goals and all different settings for her dissertation work. And the idea was she's going to set that tough goal, but give herself some emergency reserve, some sort of like, if you play Monopoly, like the get out of jail free card that you save for the real emergency, but you've got it in your back pocket, and then you can declare like everything's okay. I'm gonna use this now.
So 3 times a month, I can go the emergency card like I'm exhausted. I didn't sleep well last night. Got too much on my plate today. So these are one of 3 days that I can say it's okay, and I'm not a failure.
And it's got to be limited.
Right.
So it doesn't become like, well, every day is an emergency.
Never work out. Yeah.
And she thinks calling it an emergency is important, even though I like to call it a mulligan, because you don't want to be tempted to use it. She says she actually almost never takes it. But what she does is she sets like 7 days a week goal, but she gets 2 emergency reserves. She almost never takes them.
Each week. 2 a week. Yeah.
2 a week. And then she's done this research showing like if you do that kind of structure, right, the 7-day-a-week tough goal, she compares that to what about just a 5-day-a-week goal, which is structurally the same as 7 days with 2 get-out-of-jail-free cards.
Yes.
Or you get the 7.
Which one's
7 days with the emergency reserves crushes the other 2. Just much better performance because you're striving for that tough goal, but you don't give up on yourself if you have a miss. And so that makes up for that makes it better than everything else. And so I think this is something we can do is like, can we give ourselves a tiny bit of wiggle room? Not so much that we'll wiggle all the time.
I wonder if this is kind of like, this might be a bad analogy. It's like knowing if, I'm not married, but it's like knowing if you're married and you had like a hall pass or whatever they call it, like where it's like, okay, my celebrity crush, I know I could go do this if I wanted to, but since I have the freedom and flexibility to, I actually don't use it. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what I mean? It's like,
I wouldn't want to do that research study. I feel like I would have trouble getting the ethics approval. But
right.
Yeah, I guess
you know
it's sort of like just knowing it's within bounds and that like you have some permissiveness. Yeah, I don't know if the relationship analogy perfectly works, but it is the same idea that by knowing you have a fallback, it can get you through something that's stressful because you're like, if it's really an emergency, I could do this.
Or even it's like, okay, I have one cheat meal a week or something, or one day eat whatever I want, but I know I could have pizza 2 nights a week if I wanted to. But you're like, well, I know I could eat it this night, but as an emergency, but I know it's coming in 3 days, so I'll just wait. Something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And she's done it looking at productivity too. Like you need to do a certain task every day, and your goal to make your big, the most income is if you do it every time. But if we set different goals and give you different emergency reserves, you can get more productivity from the same workforce, from the same individuals, because they feel like it's not overwhelming. They see the wiggle room and they're able to keep pushing themselves.
So having the mulligan method or approach to your recovery from failure strategy is a good strategy, is what I'm hearing you say. Yes.
I think that understanding and appreciating the value of things like cheat meals, emergency reserves, it lets you forgive yourself. And that's the fundamental thing. Like failures happen, understand how to forgive yourself. It can be through flexibility, which we talked about, sort of having the backup plan to the backup plan instead of the if only plan. And it can be with these kinds of sort of thinking about how will I give myself an emergency reserve or a mulligan, so that being prepared for life to throw you curveballs in different ways, I think seems really important to success.
How else do we learn how to recover from failure? So
we
don't beat ourselves up.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a loser, I suck, I'm no good, I can never do this because I keep failing over and over again.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are in beat up mode.
I think you're right. I think besides these structures that we've talked about, I actually think I'm going to go back to social, because I think that's another thing that helps with recovering from failures. If you've built your team and your support structures, and recovering from failure also has to do a lot with confidence. Yes. To know that you can get back up and that there is another chance and that it's okay. I think that social support can be an important part of recovery as well.
It's so interesting you say that, and I wanted to bring this up earlier when you were talking about your mentor. Was it named Max?
Great
right?
memory, yeah.
Well, I take a lot of notes, so I try to remember it that way, otherwise I wouldn't. But where you mentioned that he does something really integral, where he essentially has you coach someone else or kind of coach yourself in the question, as opposed to him giving the advice. Simon Sinek, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Sure.
I was asking him about, because I believe self-doubt is one of the killer of dreams. When we doubt ourselves, it's hard to go after the goals and take the risks and be consistent and all these things, and without the belief at least. And I was asking him, what do you think is a great way to instill belief in someone who doubts himself? And he was like, well, I have a good example. I have this friend of mine who's kind of been down on her luck for many years. She's very talented and smart, but for whatever reason, she wasn't believing in herself. And I would try to tell her I believe in her and give her the confidence and say these things, but nothing was working. Then one day I said, you know what? I asked her if she could coach me on something. And he was like, I'm actually really struggling with this area of my life, and I think you're really smart and talented in this. Can you coach me? And him switching it around from giving her advice to saying, will you coach me on helping me improve this? He saw her confidence go through the roof. And so I think it's pretty cool that your mentor does the same with you and your team of colleagues, where it's like, okay, you guys coach each other on how you would solve this problem, and it builds that confidence with each other. So I think it's cool in terms of building confidence is we should always be coaching others, even if you feel like you don't believe in yourself.
Absolutely. And of course, it's this like slightly tricky tightrope to walk, in that if you're always coaching others and they don't want it, you're like destroying their confidence. That's one of the things I like about this idea of like advice clubs, circles of friends who all want the coaching from each other. They come and solicit it, and they also so they build each other's confidence in multiple ways by saying, hey, I want your advice, I'm soliciting it, I believe in you, and then you get the chance to coach. But also when you're struggling, you can go to them and solicit advice. So it's this beautiful circle, and I think it's really related to what Simon Sinek was saying.
I love this. I'm excited about all these strategies and the research here. I want people to get your book, How to Change, the Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. Make sure you guys get a copy of this book, or get a few copies. Lots of good strategies for change and transformation. I've got a couple final questions for you. This is called the 3 truths question. It's a hypothetical scenario. So I'd like you to imagine you get to live as long as you want to live, but for whatever reason, it's your last day on earth. Oof. And you've created and accomplished everything you want to create and accomplish in your life, many years away from now. But for whatever reason, you've got to take all of your work with you, or it's got to go somewhere else. All your written work, the audios, the videos, the research papers got to go with you somewhere else. But you get to leave behind on a piece of paper, you get to write down 3 things you know to be true from all your lessons in life, whether it be from research and academics or just life lessons. The 3 things you know to be true that you would want to kind of share with the world, and this is all we would have to remember you by, are these 3 truths or 3 lessons. What would you say would be those for you?
Wow. Okay. I mean, I think we've talked obviously about a lot of the biggest truths already. I have to pick 3. I think number 1 would be if you want to achieve your potential, if you want to achieve your goals, find a way to make the path to achievement fun. It cannot be painful in the moment. It has to be enjoyable to get there, or else you're not going to persist and achieve as much. So to me, I think that's number 1. Number 2 is probably about fresh starts. I think I would want to leave people with the realization that life is full of these moments that give us renewed confidence in ourselves, renewed motivation, a sense of a new beginning and a clean slate, and that by looking for them, by looking for opportunities to create chapter breaks when things aren't going right, we can get further. I believe, I'd like to do even more research on this to prove this in a million different ways, but what we know already is it's clear. These moments arise, they help us pursue our goals. We can call them out and help people achieve more. So that fresh starts are there, they're real, they're coming, and they can give us the opportunities we need to grow.
Yeah.
And not give us that psychological immune system boost that we need. Okay, so make it fun, fresh starts. I think my third comes back to what we just talked about the importance of flexibility. Mm-hmm. That you have to create flexible approaches to achievement, that you cannot be too rigid, that rigidity is the enemy of habit and success, because life throws you curveballs constantly. And, of course, routinization, we all understand that there is sort of a habit loop, and when we want to build, but we have to build it with a recognition of the real world and the real constraints we'll face. So I think those are my three.
Those are cool. I like those. I want to acknowledge you for a moment, Katy, before I ask you the final question, for your commitment to obsessing over this research and figuring out how can I help as many people as possible with the data, with the science, the research studies, and leaving something you loved behind, which is, sports, to go all in school, and then continue to be in this pursuit for however many years you've been doing this now and making this your life's mission, because it's making a lasting impact on a lot of people. One tool that someone could get from this book or this interview could really support someone in overcoming a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of dissatisfaction, of being stuck in something, could prevent them from dying sooner than they need to, from changing a habit or routine, psychologically or physically. So I really acknowledge you for being committed to your mission and doing it in a fun way. I appreciate and acknowledge your efforts here. And again, I want people to get your book, How to Change, The Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be, by Katy Milkman. I think you'll be very inspired, so make sure you check this out. You are also on social media. Which platform would you say are you on the most? That's your go-to.
Twitter. I'm on Twitter the most.
Katy_Milkman, right? On
Yes.
Twitter. And you're also Katy Milkman on Instagram and Facebook. You can find you there as well. But Twitter is your go-to, where you'll be most active. Lurking, most reactive and active.
Posting.
Yes, exactly. So if you want to connect with Katy.
Retweeting.
Yeah, if you want to connect with Katy, you'll see a lot of people's comments there. Share this podcast or the YouTube video over on there and tag her and let her know what you enjoyed most about this. You've got a podcast as well called Choiceology with Katy Milkman, right?
I do.
And so people can check that out. You can go to katymilkman.com for all more information about the book and all the different things you're up to as well. Anything else that we should be aware of or supportive for you?
For anyone who's really into the academic stuff, I run this initiative with Angela Duckworth called the Behavior Change for Good Initiative, and we put out a lot of research papers, and so that might be another place people who want to get into the nerdy stuff,
the nerdy data,
see the data. That's another spot.
Where is that? If they go to katymilkman.com, is that there?
They'll find it, or bcfg.upenn.edu, University of Pennsylvania. That's another place to find out about our center.
We got to get Duckworth on here as well.
Yeah,
we got to get her on. I've had a few people try to make the connection for that. But I think she's not traveling right now. So
she's just getting back.
Okay,
on the
perfect.
road,
So
yes,
make it happen
soon.
now.
I'm sure you can find her at a time when she's in LA.
Perfect. Okay, Katy. Final question. What's your definition of greatness?
Oh my goodness, it's such a good question. I should have prepared for this, huh? I think my definition of greatness is people who are. There's a North Star, something, a purpose and meaning and mission that's driving them forward creates greatness to me. And that's when I see someone who has that clear North Star, that purpose, and they've built their life, created the structures to support it, and are sort of leaning towards it in all aspects of themselves. To me, that's greatness. And it can be seasonal, so the North Star can change seasonally, but seeing someone who's really lined up everything because they have that North Star and purpose, that's when I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness.
Love it. Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This was really fun.
No emotion is bad. Every emotion is telling us a story, but there's certain emotions that make us tired. Our brain, body, and conscious mind are limited in energy. The non-conscious mind is unlimited in energy. So the non-conscious mind will keep driving us to just keep going. So we have to discipline, the conscious and the unconscious.